So I'm not sure if Simon had any real idea what I'd end up talking about here this morning, but what I would like to do is to give you a few thoughts on innovation and entrepreneurship and the importance of innovation and entrepreneurship, mainly really from, if you like, ultimately the public policy perspective. You know, why does this matter to Ireland? Why is it important that we enhance and develop a strong environment for innovation and entrepreneurship? So hopefully I'm going to, okay. So why does innovation matter? And I suppose the first thing is people tend to think of innovation as being something that's got to do with, you know, some techies in California making truckloads of money for themselves, and beyond that it doesn't have a lot of societal impact. The reality is that nothing could be further from the truth. Innovation is tremendously important to society at large. It reduces waste and environmental damage, and I think that we will see in the future, when people look back on the history of sustainability and look back on the battle that we're fighting to correct some of the damage that's being done to the environment, it will be people such as, sorry, I've forgotten the guy's name, Elon Musk, right? It'll be people like Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, the founder of SpaceX, the founder of SolarCity, co-founder of SolarCity, who will be seen to have done more for sustainability and more to address the environmental challenge than any politician. So innovation is enormously important from that perspective. Innovation also increases productivity, it creates growth, it generates wealth for society as a whole. It also improves standards of living because it provides better products at cheaper prices for more people, right? It allows us to deliver better standards of living for everyone as a result. Finally, it also provides more interesting work for people, which is increasingly important as our economies develop. It's also important at the level of individual companies. This is a famous slide from Clay Christensen in the Innovator's Dilemma, and it shows the development of the computer disk industry from the days of kind of very, very large, bulky disks right through to kind of very, very small floppy disks, which don't even exist anymore. The very interesting thing about this slide is that as time progressed, the market became larger and larger. It became an absolutely enormous market. But as each new generation of disk technology came into being, the people who had dominated the previous generation of disk technology almost always fell by the wayside, right? They failed to innovate. They were essentially, if you like, fat and happy on the profits from what was already a large business, and they missed the innovation in their own industry. And as a result, as you go through the history of the disk drive industry, of the mass storage industry, with each generation, the dominant players changed almost completely in each cycle. And the reason for that is those companies failed to innovate and they missed the innovation in their own market. If you look at that industry overall, it's probably the largest destruction of VC capital in history, believe it or not, because there were 146 firms founded in that industry. Many of those had their brief period of dominance, or their brief period where they were real companies, but 125 of those companies failed. And the fundamental reason for most of those failures was a failure to innovate. And we've seen exactly the same thing, even in more recent markets, which are perceived as not having been through maybe so many cycles. If you look at internet search or social networks, where are the early players from internet search today? They're all gone. Where are the early social networks? They're all gone, right? So innovation matters at the level of the individual firm as well. Now, where are some of the mistakes that we're making today? Well, the first is we consistently confuse R&D expenditure with innovation, right? And this chart highlights why innovation should never be confused with R&D spending. What you would expect if R&D spending really mattered was that it would produce results at the company level. In other words, if you spend more on R&D, then you should expect to get results as a business. You should expect to get increased sales growth, for example. So effectively what this chart is showing is percentage R&D spending, right, versus sales growth, not in that year, because that wouldn't be fair. You expect that the payoff will be in the future, but sales growth over the following 5 years. And this is for quite a large universe. It's the Global Innovation 1000, so it's a lot of companies, right? And what it shows is that there is virtually no correlation between R&D spending and sales growth, right? So the idea that you can create innovation simply by investing large amounts of capital into R&D, whether that's in universities or in individual companies, is totally false. It just simply doesn't stack up. And really, I think that's almost, this, if you like, is a consequence of this next point, which is that innovation is not about invention. And if you actually go to the dictionaries and you look at definitions of what innovation really is, what you'll see is phrases like something new or different introduced. The highlighting is mine, obviously, but something new or different introduced, such as a new method or device. Arranging the economic requirements for implementing an invention. The profitable implementation of ideas. The intersection of invention and insight leading to the creation of social and/or economic value, right? So I suppose there's really 3 things that I would say about that. There is always an economic or social context to innovation and entrepreneurship. It's not synonymous with creativity. It also requires strategy and implementation, the dog work of getting a product into the market. And really, a big part of innovation is actually about selling, right? It's about getting something out into the market, not just inventing. And for us as VCs, this is sometimes a surprise to entrepreneurs. The reality is that there is absolutely no shortage in the world of ideas or inventions. The challenge is actually to successfully introduce those ideas or inventions to a market. The other thing that I think is generally true is that innovation requires a few grumpy people. When you look at great entrepreneurs, it's almost always the case that they see something being done badly And they hate that, right? It just kind of burns them up that nobody has found a better way to do this. Or, if you'll pardon the expletive, this is just so shit, right? There has to be a better way. And that's very much the motivation for an awful lot of entrepreneurs. It's not driven typically by money. You'll have heard the kind of the California expression, money is just how we keep score. The reality is the vast majority of great entrepreneurs are driven by a burning desire to fix something that's broken, something that's been done badly, and something that really ought to be done better. The other thing, and this I think remains sadly a huge issue in Ireland, is that innovation requires us to embrace failure. This is my sort of all-time favorite MBA, Harvard Business School grid. And it shows being right and being wrong, and being in line with the consensus and not in line with the consensus. Now, generally speaking, we all like to be right, It's nice to be right. But the reality is that if you're right and you're in line with the consensus, that's grand. You might make a little bit of money, but there are going to be lots of other people in that business, right, doing essentially the same thing, because everybody saw this opportunity. Everybody saw that this was the way the market was going to go. And the opportunity to have a real breakout success in that space is actually going to be quite limited, right? If, on the other hand, you're wrong, but you're in line with the consensus, that's actually a pretty comfortable place to be as well, right? That's the place where everybody says, God, hard luck, you called it wrong, but so did everybody else, right? So that's okay, you weren't the only one who got that wrong, if you like. Where the really big money is made, where the really breakout innovations are, is in the box where you're right and you're non-consensus, right? The box where you're the only guy in the world who called this right, and you've built an enormous business because you were right and everyone else was wrong. That's a fantastic place to be. You're going to be a dominant player in a new market. You're going to have limited competition until people realize, oh shit, this guy has got it right, but they're already 2 years behind you at that stage. The problem with that is that being non-consensus brings into play the horrible, you're non-consensus and you're wrong box, right? That's the box where your spouse or partner says to you, you fucking idiot. Everybody told you you were wrong, but no, you wouldn't listen. You just had to go ahead and do this anyway, and now look what's happened, you gobshite, right? That's the box that's brought into play. And we really have to be prepared to absolutely accept that and embrace it, and embrace that possibility if we want to be successful in generating big entrepreneurial successes. So turning now maybe a little bit more to the kind of, if you like, the public policy side of this, there's a sixth bonus thought, and that is that you don't get to decide where innovation happens, right? And sometimes when I talk about this, people think that what I mean is we shouldn't try to have innovation in Galway or Donegal or Cork, because as many of you know, I'm a pure dub, and clearly it's the greatest place on earth. But that's not really what I'm saying at all. What I'm trying to say here is that, you know, the world market doesn't care if a piece of software was developed by a vanishing Eskimo tribe in the wilds of Canada. They do not give a toss, right? So in terms of developing innovation in other parts of, other more remote parts of the country, what we need to think about is what are the assets that those places have that do matter, and build on those assets, rather than trying to, force innovative companies to go to these places and locate in these places because because of the perceived benefits of doing so. That always fails. So finally, to kind of summarize the thoughts really from a public policy perspective, the first thing is that we're not going to create an innovation economy through investment in research alone, right? I don't mean that we should not invest in basic research in universities, but we cannot see that as being the be-all and the end-all from the perspective of developing a fantastic innovation economy. We also need to stop confusing regional policy and innovation policy. And we do that all the time by creating schemes, for example, that say you get X benefits if it's in the arsehole of nowhere, and X minus Y if it's in Dublin or Cork, We need to focus on creating an environment that will allow innovation and entrepreneurship to flourish. We need to make early stage risk capital investment attractive. And by the way, I'm not talking about the type of investing that I do, later stage VC. I'm talking about sort of very early stage angel seed investing in very young businesses. We need to develop innovation skills rather than just research skills, and we don't do a good job of that today. We also need to address the challenge of people. We're in a global war for talent. There are things that we need to do with our education system, but sadly that's effectively a 10-year project. So we need to look at immigration policy in order to feed the need for highly talented people. My personal view is that the foreign offices of Enterprise Ireland and the IDA should have books of tear-off visas, and they should be out there marketing to talented people around the world and saying, if you have the skills that our economy needs, I will write you out a visa on the spot and just tear it off. There you go. And by the way, Ireland is a great place to bring your family and to bring up a family and to build a life. So, do you have a spouse and do you have kids? I'll just add them on to the, tick the box on the visa. There you go. We look forward to welcoming you to Ireland. And they should be out selling that, because the countries that are going to win in the future are the countries that are open to talent from all around the world. We also need to focus on lean innovation. The reality probably is that we're not going to be able to build Elon Musk's mega battery factory anywhere in Ireland. Enormous amounts of capital are required for that. So we need to focus on opportunities where the capital requirements are smaller, and we need to address the cost and complexity of regulation and taxation. For a few years, I was kind of a sole trader doing consulting and that kind of thing. I used to get a pain in my head every time I paid myself trying to figure out our tax system with sort of 40 rates of PRSI. I think it's now about 6 or 7 rates of USC, 2 rates of basic income tax, and bands that don't align across those 3 different types of tax. It's absolute lunacy. So we need to address that. And finally, we need to innovate everywhere. We need to innovate in government services. We need to innovate in our health service, and we're simply not doing that today. So really, the fundamental message, I guess, is that innovation and entrepreneurship matters to society in a really, really deep way. And if we want to succeed as a nation in the future, we need to be conscious of that, and we need to address it, and we need to improve the environment for entrepreneurship and innovation. Thank you.